3 days after my surgery, I saw my husband and sister kiss through my hospital window. I didn't confront them, I set traps. What I did next made them wish they'd never betrayed me. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. The pain from the surgery was nothing compared to the pain I felt when I looked down from my hospital window and saw my husband holding hands with my sister, smiling like I never mattered. That's the honest-to-God truth. The physical pain, the one the nurses kept scribbling notes about, was a manageable fire. It was a neat, clean line of angry red across my abdomen, held together by a row of cold, metal staples I tried my best not to think about. It was a solid 7 on their little chart of smiling and crying faces. But the other pain, the one that blindsided me when the morphine drip had worn off and the world was swimming back into a sharp, brutally clear focus, that pain broke the scale. It was 100. It was 1,000. It was a whole new kind of hurt. Before I saw them, I'd been feeling something close to hopeful. The surgery had gone well. The tumor on my liver, the one that had kept me awake for weeks with icy dread, was gone. And it was benign. I was going to be okay. I was lying there, propped up against the stiff hospital pillows, watching the city lights begin to glitter in the dusk, feeling a quiet sense of gratitude. I felt grateful for my husband, Garrett, who had been so wonderfully attentive. Grateful for my sister, Corinne, who had dropped everything in Portland to fly out and take care of me. I was thinking about the future, about getting back to work, about planting the new hydrangeas I'd bought for the garden. That's when I decided to get up. The nurses had been encouraging me to walk a little, and I needed to feel like I could do something for myself. I slowly, carefully, swung my legs over the side of the bed. Every muscle in my core screamed in protest. I gripped the four-pole like it was a life raft, my knuckles white, and shuffled my way, inch by painful inch, to the massive, floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city. And that's when I saw it. Life has these moments, doesn't it? These before and after moments. 1 second, I was a woman recovering from surgery, loved and cared for. The next, I was a fool. Down in the glass-walled hospital cafeteria, 37 floors below, my world ended. I watched my husband, my Garrett, lean across a small, white table and kiss my sister, my Corinne, on the lips. It wasn't a quick peck. It wasn't a comforting, "we'll get through this" kiss between in-laws who had become close during a family crisis. It was slow. It was deep. It was a kiss that spoke of familiarity, of a shared history I knew nothing about. It was a kiss that spoke of months, maybe years, of secrets, of stolen moments, of a whole other life they were living right under my nose. I had been too trusting, too busy with our business, to ever suspect a thing. My hand, the one with the 4-tube taped uncomfortably to the back of it, started to shake uncontrollably. I gripped the cold, metal windowsill to steady myself. The surgical staples in my belly pulled tight, sending a sharp, stabbing jolt of fire through my core. But it was nothing. It was a flicker compared to the inferno that was tearing through my chest, incinerating every happy memory, every shared dream, every promise he had ever made. Just 3 days ago, I'd been wheeled into the operating room. Garrett had held my other hand so tightly. He'd leaned in close, his voice thick with what I had mistaken for fear for my life, and whispered, "I'll be right here when you wake up, Audrey. I'm not going anywhere. I promise." My sister, my sweet, bubbly younger sister Corinne, had flown in with a suitcase full of magazines and a bright, concerned smile. She was here, supposedly, to help care for me, to make me soup and help me wash my hair. Now I understood the real reason for her sudden, selfless availability. It wasn't about my recovery. It was about her opportunity. Down below, they finally broke the kiss, but their hands remained clasped across the table, a perfect, sickening picture of unity. Corinne tipped her head back and laughed, a bright, musical sound that I could imagine even from this distance. It was the same laugh that had charmed our parents, our teachers, everyone, since we were children. The same laugh that had, now that my mind was furiously connecting the dots in my past, somehow managed to charm my first high school boyfriend away from me. She'd claimed it was all just a big misunderstanding back then, that she didn't know I liked him that much. I had believed her. I had always believed her. This was no misunderstanding. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, trying to anchor myself to something real. I watched as my Garrett, began to trace lazy, intimate circles on her palm with his thumb. My breath hitched in my throat. A wave of nausea, acrid and hot, washed over me. He used to do that to me. All the time. When we first started dating 12 years ago, we'd sit in his beat-up Ford pickup for hours, just talking and dreaming, and he would trace those same circles on my hand. He did it when he proposed to me on that ridiculously cold beach in Maine, his hands warming mine. He did it when I had crippling panic attacks after my mother's funeral 2 years ago. He'd hold my hand, trace those circles, and whisper, "I got you, Audrey. It's going to be okay." He was my rock. My safe place. And he had given it all to her. My own ghostly reflection stared back at me from the window. I didn't recognize the woman I saw. Her eyes were hollow and huge in a pale face. Her hair was greasy and pulled back in a messy, pathetic bun. Hospital gowns are not designed for dignity, but I looked like I was already wasting away. Meanwhile, even from 37 stories up, Corinne was vibrant. Her auburn hair, the hair my mother always said was so striking, caught the fluorescent lights of the cafeteria. And she was wearing a navy blue dress. The dress I'd picked out for her, the one I'd bought her for Christmas last year because I thought the color would make her eyes pop. The irony was a physical weight, crushing the air from my lungs. A soft knock on my door made me jump, pulling me from the horror movie playing out below. "Mrs. Roberts? Time for your medication." It was Patricia, my evening nurse. Patricia was the kind of nurse you see in movies. She was in her late 50s, with kind, crinkly eyes that had seen it all and hands that were always steady and warm. She had been a constant, comforting presence since I woke up from the anesthesia, a quiet professional who knew when to talk and when to just be silent. She came in carrying a small paper cup with 2 pills at the bottom and a plastic pitcher of lukewarm water. "How are you feeling tonight, dear?" she asked, her voice a soft, soothing balm. She set the items on the rolling bedside table and moved it closer to me. I had to physically force myself to turn away from the window, to tear my eyes away from the scene of my life's demolition. I pulled a mask of calm neutrality over my face. It felt heavy, ill-fitting. I was sure she could see right through it. "I'm feeling better," I said. My voice sounded thin, like a stretched rubber band. "Much better, thank you." It was a complete lie, of course, but not about the surgery. The physical healing was progressing just fine. Dr. Chen had been pleased with my progress that morning. It was everything else, the entire architecture of my life, that had been reduced to a pile of smoking rubble. "Oh, that's just wonderful to hear," Patricia said, beaming as she unwrapped a blood pressure cuff. "Good news is the best medicine." She wrapped the cuff around my arm and pumped it up, her movements practiced and efficient. "You know," she said conversationally, "your husband and sister have been just so devoted. Taking shifts to stay with you, making sure one of them is always here. Mr. Roberts was here all afternoon, just watching you sleep. It's a beautiful thing, to see a family come together and support each other during difficult times like these. You're a very lucky woman." My throat tightened. I felt a hysterical laugh bubbling up, and I had to swallow it down, hard. It felt like swallowing glass. "Yes," I managed to choke out, focusing on a water stain on the ceiling. "Beautiful. Alrighty, blood pressure is looking perfect," she announced, scribbling on my chart. She continued to chat while she worked, fluffing my pillows and checking my drip. She talked about the unseasonably warm weather for October, about the hospital's new rooftop garden on the 7th floor, about how her son was struggling with his college applications. I just nodded and made the appropriate noises. "Oh, really? That's nice. Kids these days. But my mind was a chaotic whirlwind of questions. How long? How could I have been so blind? Did they think I was a complete and utter fool? And then, a thought, so cold and so ugly it made me shiver, slithered into my brain. Were they just waiting for me to die? The tumor had been benign, thank God. But for 48 agonizing hours, while we waited for the biopsy results to come back, we had all been forced to confront the very real possibility that I might be dying. I remembered how distraught Garrett had seemed. He'd barely left my side, his eyes constantly red-rimmed. He held my hand until it was numb. I had thought it was the raw fear of losing me. Now, I had to re-examine that memory through this new, sickening lens. Was it grief? Or was it guilt? Or was it just the terrified scrambling of a man afraid his dirty little secret was about to be exposed before he had a chance to secure his future? After Patricia left, with a final cheerful, "You get some good rest, now, you've earned it," I sat there in the humming silence of the mechanical hospital bed. I stared at the acoustic ceiling tiles, counting the little perforated holes, trying to absorb the sheer, seismic scale of their betrayal. Garrett wasn't just my husband of 7 years. He was my business partner. We had built Robert's marketing solutions from nothing, starting it on a pair of folding tables in our spare bedroom 5 years ago. We'd worked 18-hour days, poured every last cent of our savings into it, and finally, through sheer force of will, made it profitable. The company was our child. It was our future. And it was worth nearly $2 million. My name, Audrey Roberts, was on the door. And Corinne, she wasn't just my sister. She was supposed to be my best friend. The person I called first, sobbing hysterically, when the doctor first mentioned the shadow on my liver scan. The person who flew out and helped me pick out my wedding dress, who held up the train and told me with tears in her eyes that I was the most beautiful bride she'd ever seen. She was my maid of honor. She stood beside me at the altar and watched me marry the man she was now secretly kissing in a hospital cafeteria. My phone buzzed on the bedside table, a jarring sound in the quiet room. It was a text from Garrett. "Getting coffee with Corinne. Be back up soon. Love you." The casual cruelty, the effortless hypocrisy of those 2 words, "love you," sent a shard of ice straight through my heart. I didn't reply. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone across the room. I just took a screenshot of the message. Then, I opened my phone's camera. I held it up to the window again, my hand surprisingly steady now, and I zoomed in as far as the lens would allow. The picture was grainy, pixelated, but the image was unmistakable. They were still sitting together, but now Corinne had shifted to Garrett's side of the small table. Her head was on his shoulder, and her hand was resting high up on his thigh. I took a photo. Then another. And another. I needed proof. I needed evidence. And most importantly, I needed a plan. I became a predator in my own life. A silent hunter. For the next 2 hours, from my perch 37 floors up, I watched them. I documented their every interaction like a detective on a stakeout. They weren't careful. They were brazen. Why would they be? In their minds, I was upstairs, oblivious, weak, and recovering from major surgery. They held hands openly on the tabletop. He fed her a bite of his blueberry muffin. At one point, he pulled her close, his lips brushing her ear as he whispered something that made her blush and playfully swat his arm. It was a whole damn romantic comedy playing out in the place where I was recovering from having a piece of my body cut out. When they finally decided to grace me with their presence again, they were at least smart enough to enter separately, to keep up the performance. Corinne came in first, her cheeks flushed. From the autumn chill outside? Or from the heat of her lies? It was impossible to tell. "Hey, sweetie," she chirped, her voice a little too bright, a little too loud for the quiet room. "How are you feeling?" She glided over and sat in the squeaky vinyl visitor's chair next to my bed. She took my hand in hers. The same hand that had been holding my husband's 20 minutes earlier. The thought made my skin crawl, and I had to fight the urge to snatch my hand away. "Tired," I said, letting my eyelids droop convincingly. "My incision is really aching." "Where have you two been for so long?" "Oh, just stretching my legs." "This place is so stuffy, I felt like I couldn't breathe," she said, squeezing my fingers with false sympathy. Garrett went down to the lobby to make some important calls about that new hotel account. "You know him, always working. He's so worried about things slipping while you're out of commission." Another lie. A beautiful, layered lie. I had watched him on his personal phone the entire time, laughing and smiling, not a care in the world. A few minutes later, Garrett himself appeared in the doorway, a perfect portrait of the concerned husband. He was holding 2 large cups of coffee. He walked over and handed one to Corinne, and their fingers brushed in the exchange. It was such a small, fleeting gesture, almost imperceptible to a casual observer. But to me, now, it was a thunderclap. It was loaded with an intimacy, a casual familiarity, that screamed their guilt. "Hey, beautiful," he said, his voice a soft murmur. He leaned down and kissed my forehead. His lips felt cold and alien against my clammy skin. I had to force myself not to flinch. "You look a little better today. You've got some color back in your cheeks." "I feel a little better," I lied, my voice a near-perfect echo of his lie. I studied his face, searching for any flicker of deception, any crack in the facade. He looked tired, I'd give him that. There were dark circles under his green eyes. But he met my gaze without flinching. He was a good liar. A phenomenal liar. I had lived with him for 7 years, and I never knew. "Patricia says I might be able to go home tomorrow," I told them, watching their faces closely for their reactions. "That's great news, honey." "That's fantastic." He settled into the other visitor's chair, the picture of genuine relief. He reached over and patted my leg. "Corinne was just saying she could stay for another week, maybe even 2, to help out around the house until you're back on your feet." "If that's okay with you, of course, Audrey," Corinne added quickly, looking at me with her big, innocent brown eyes. The same eyes she'd used to convince our parents she hadn't been the one to break the antique vase when we were kids. "I know how much you value your independence." My independence? As if I had any left. My entire life, my home, my business, my future, was dependent on a man who was sleeping with my sister. "That would be wonderful," I said, forcing a weak, grateful smile. "Honestly, I don't know what I'd do without both of you." They exchanged a glance. It was so brief, a millisecond of shared relief, that I would have missed it a week ago. But not now. Now, I was watching. I was watching everything. The rest of the afternoon was a surreal exercise in psychological torture. They sat with me, making small talk, playing the parts they had assigned themselves. They brought me magazines I had no intention of reading. They recounted funny stories from their childhood. All the while, I was a silent analyst, a human lie detector, dissecting every word, every gesture, every micro-expression. I replayed the last year of my life in my head, but with a new filter. Every business trip Garrett had taken alone, every time Corinne had called and he'd left the room to talk, every inside joke between them that I was never quite privy to. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture so ugly and so vast it took my breath away. Our last anniversary dinner, 6 months ago at that fancy Italian place downtown. Garrett had seemed so distracted, so distant. He'd been on his phone constantly, texting under the table. I'd assumed it was about the Morrison Hotel's account, a huge potential client we were trying to land. I'd actually felt guilty for being annoyed with him. Now, I knew. He hadn't been working. He'd been texting my sister, probably sitting right across from me, telling her he wished she was there instead. That night, after visiting hours ended and they'd both gone home, to our home, to sleep in our bed, a thought that made me physically ill, I waited. I waited until the hospital was quiet, until the only sounds were the distant beeping of machines and the soft squeak of a nurse's shoes in the hallway. Then, I found the number in my phone and made the call. Benjamin Walsh had been our business lawyer for years. He was sharp, discreet, thorough, and most importantly, he was the kind of no-nonsense, old-school lawyer who was available for late-night emergency calls from a panicked client. "Audrey? Is everything all right?" he answered on the second ring, his voice instantly alert. "I heard about your surgery. I was going to send flowers tomorrow." I took a deep, shaky breath, the air rattling in my lungs. "Benjamin," I said, my voice low and confidential, barely a whisper. "I need to discuss some legal matters. Urgently. It's about Garrett." "Of course. I'm listening." "What's going on?" I told him everything. The unvarnished, humiliating truth. I told him what I saw from the window. I told him about the kiss, the hand-holding, their lies. I told him about my suspicions, about the anniversary dinner, about the constant texting. I just laid it all out, the raw, ugly story. Benjamin listened patiently, without interruption. The only sound on his end was the faint, steady scratching of a pen on a legal pad. "I need to know my options," I finished, my voice finally cracking on the last word. "For the divorce. For the business. For everything." "Okay, Audrey, listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice calm and steady, a rock in my churning sea of emotion. "First of all, I'm very sorry you're going through this. Second, we need to be smart and strategic. You're in a community property state, so typically, the assets acquired during the marriage, including the business you built, would be split 50-50. My heart plummeted. "However," he continued, and I held my breath, "if we can prove adultery and, more importantly, a pattern of financial deception, we can argue for a more favorable division. It's a legal concept called dissipation of assets. If he's been spending marital funds, company money, joint savings, on the affair, that changes the equation significantly. We have a very strong case regarding the business you built together, but we need undeniable proof." "What kind of proof, exactly?" I asked, my mind already racing. "Hard evidence. Photos, texts, emails, witness testimony if possible. We can subpoena his phone records and credit card statements. We'll look for hotel stays, expensive gifts, flights. The more documentation, the stronger our position in front of a judge." I thought about the grainy photos I'd taken through the hospital window. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough to win a war. "There's something else you need to consider," Benjamin said, his tone turning even more serious. "If they've been planning this for a while, as it sounds like they have, they might try to hide assets. They might try to manipulate the business finances before you can act. We should move quickly to protect your interests. It might be wise to file an injunction to freeze the major business accounts." My head was spinning. Just 12 hours ago, my biggest worry was whether I could eat solid food. Now I was neck-deep in legal strategy, planning a divorce and an asset protection strategy against my own husband. "Let me think about it," I said, my voice barely audible. I need more evidence first. I need to be absolutely sure of my footing before I make a move." "I understand. But be careful, Audrey," he warned before we hung up. "If they even suspect that you know, they will accelerate whatever plans they have. You're in a chess match now. Don't let them know you see the board." After the call, I lay in the darkness, the city lights outside my window seeming to mock me with their cheerful glow. I listened to the symphony of the hospital at night, the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor down the hall, the soft squeak of nurses' shoes, the distant, tinny sound of a television. My body was healing, staple by staple, but my trust in the two people I loved most in the world was shattered beyond any hope of repair. I needed proof, yes. Benjamin was right. But I realized in that dark, sterile room, I needed more than that. A favorable divorce settlement wasn't enough. I needed them to face consequences. Real, lasting consequences that matched the sheer magnitude of their betrayal. The next morning, my surgeon, the brilliant Dr. Chen, arrived with a cheerful smile and a stack of discharge papers. Garrett and Corinne hovered nearby like a pair of vultures disguised as doves, playing their roles to Oscar-worthy perfection. They asked all the right questions about my pain medication schedule, my follow-up appointments, my dietary restrictions. Now, she'll need someone to help with daily activities for the first week or two, Dr. Chen explained, looking from Garrett to Corinne with an appreciative smile. No lifting anything more than 10 pounds, no driving, and absolutely no strenuous activity. Rest is paramount. Don't you worry, doctor. I'll be working from home for the foreseeable future, Garrett said immediately, placing a proprietary, performative hand on my shoulder. And Corinne is staying on to help. We've got it completely covered. How convenient for them. A whole week, maybe more, under the same roof. My roof. With me as their captive audience. The ride home was a silent, excruciating form of torture. I sat in the passenger seat of our Lexus, staring out at the blur of familiar suburban streets, every landmark a painful reminder of a life that was now a lie. Corinne sat in the back, attempting to fill the thick, awkward silence with a steady stream of meaningless chatter about the weather, the traffic, a funny podcast she'd listened to on the plane. She mentioned, a little too casually, that she'd rented a car at the airport. You know, just in case I need to run errands for you while Garrett's working, she'd said. Or, I thought grimly, in case they needed separate transportation for their secret afternoon meetings. Our house, a beautiful craftsman-style home in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood that I had spent years lovingly decorating, looked exactly the same as when I'd left it a week ago. But as Garrett carefully helped me out of the car, the place felt fundamentally different. It felt tainted. Contaminated. Every window, every door, every stone in the garden path seemed to hold a secret I was now privy to. How many times had Corinne been here when I was away on a business trip? How many lies had been told within these walls? How many times had they laughed at my blindness? They settled me into the living room on our large, comfortable sofa, propping me up with an excessive number of pillows and draping a soft cashmere blanket over my legs. Corinne bustled around my own kitchen, her movements efficient and disturbingly familiar, and returned with a steaming cup of my favorite chamomile tea. Garrett brought my laptop and phone charger, placing them within easy reach on the oak coffee table. They were a well-oiled machine of deceit. I should probably just take a quick look at my client emails, I said, my voice deliberately weak and breathy. Make sure there are no fires to put out. Garrett frowned with an impressive display of practiced concern. Are you sure you're up for that, Audrey? You just got out of the hospital. You need to rest. Just for a few minutes, I insisted, already formulating my plan. I won't be able to relax until I know nothing urgent has slipped through the cracks. He hesitated, exchanging a quick, unreadable glance with Corinne, then nodded. Okay, honey. But don't overdo it. 20 minutes, max. The moment they left me alone, Garrett disappearing into his home office down the hall, Corinne heading upstairs to the guest room to unpack, I went to work. I opened my laptop, but I didn't navigate to my work email. First, I created a new, completely anonymous email account. Then, I painstakingly sent myself the photos I'd taken from the hospital window, creating a digital evidence locker. After that, I did something that made my stomach churn, something that felt like a fundamental violation but was utterly necessary. I navigated to the website Benjamin had discreetly recommended in a follow-up text. It was for a high-end, undetectable spyware, the kind designed for corporate espionage or, in this case, a wife about to go to war. It would log every keystroke, take periodic screenshots of the desktop, and intercept all incoming and outgoing communication from every app. If they were coordinating their affair digitally on our shared home computer, I would have a perfect, time-stamped record of it. My hands trembled as I entered our credit card information, the irony was not lost on me, and initiated the remote, silent installation. The progress bar on the screen moved with agonizing slowness. Next, I pulled a small, sleek device from the side pocket of my work bag. It was a voice-activated audio recorder, no bigger than my thumb, with a battery that could last for days. It was something I had ordered online months ago for taking notes in business meetings but had, thankfully, never gotten around to using. While they were both occupied in other parts of the house, I forced myself to stand. Leaning heavily on the furniture for support, I hobbled over to the large, built-in bookshelf that dominated one wall of the living room. I tucked the tiny device behind a row of leather-bound classic novels we had never opened. It had a clear, unobstructed line of sound to the sofa and the two main armchairs. If they talked, I would hear every single word. Over the next few days, I became the ghost in my own home. I played the part of the perfect, grateful, recovering patient. I let Corinne bring me bland soup and toast. I pretended to nap for hours on end in the living room, my eyes closed, my breathing even, while my ears strained to catch the cadence of their hushed conversations from the kitchen. I feigned overwhelming fatigue to get out of watching movies with them in the evenings, which gave me precious, uninterrupted time alone with my laptop, my new command center. The picture that emerged from my clandestine surveillance was worse, so much worse, than I could have ever imagined. Through the spyware, I discovered their primary method of communication was a messaging app that supposedly deleted all conversations after 24 hours. They thought they were clever. But the screenshot function on the spyware was cleverer. It captured enough fragments, enough incriminating snippets, to reveal the sickening scope of their deception. They had been involved for over a year. It had started during a business conference I had sent Garrett to in Seattle. Corinne, who lived just a few hours away in Portland, had coincidentally driven up to see him for the weekend. The messages were explicit, both physically and emotionally. They talked about their future together, about how much they loved each other. They agonized over how guilty they felt for hurting me, but always concluded that what they had was too special to give up. Garrett had even been looking at two-bedroom apartment listings in Portland's Pearl District. But it was the audio recorder that delivered the most devastating blows. That captured the conversations that made my blood run cold and solidified the ice forming around my heart. One afternoon, while they thought I was deep in a painkiller-induced nap on the sofa, I was wide awake, listening to the live feed from the recorder through my wireless earbuds, which were hidden by my hair. Their low voices drifted in from the kitchen, where they were making lunch. "She seems suspicious today," Corinne said, her voice tight with a nervous anxiety I now recognized. "She keeps asking these strange, pointed questions about my trip." "You're just being paranoid, Corey," Garrett replied, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "She's on heavy pain medication and just had major surgery. Her head's not in the game right now. Trust me, she's not thinking about anything other than when her next dose of Percocet is. I just feel so terrible about this timing. It feels so ghoulish. What if something had gone wrong with the operation? What would we have done?" "But it didn't," Garrett said firmly. "And we can't keep putting our lives on hold. We have been hiding this for over a year. It's exhausting." "So, what's the plan?" she asked, her voice small and childlike. When do we finally tell her?" There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of a knife chopping vegetables. I held my breath, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "After she's fully recovered," Garrett finally said, his voice decisive. "We give it a few more weeks. Let her get her strength back. Then, we'll sit her down together. We'll be gentle but firm. We'll explain that we fell in love, that it wasn't planned, that it just happened. We'll tell her we want to handle this as maturely as possible, for everyone's sake." Maturely. There was that word again. As if there was a mature way to tell your wife of 7 years that you've been sleeping with her sister. "What about the business?" Corinne asked, her voice laced with a practical concern that made me sick. "And the house? And what about the inheritance she got from her parents?" "We'll figure it out," he said dismissively, as if dividing up my life was a simple matter of logistics. "Maybe she'll want to buy me out of the company. Or we can sell it and split the proceeds." the house, too. Don't worry. We'll make it work. We'll be okay. They were already dividing up my life, my parents' legacy, like it was a pile of assets on a balance sheet. But the worst part, the absolute coldest, most unforgivable cut, came 3 days later. I was in bed upstairs, again pretending to be asleep, listening to the live feed from the recorder on my phone as they cleaned up after dinner in the kitchen below. I was so terrified we'd have to confess everything if she, Garrett said, his voice barely a whisper. The guilt was eating me alive when we were sitting in that hospital waiting room, waiting for those biopsy results. Me too, Corinne agreed, her voice equally soft. I felt like a monster. But, and I know it's a horrible, horrible thing to even think, but a part of me, a tiny part, wondered if it would be easier. There was a heavy silence, a silence that seemed to suck all the air out of my own room. Corinne, Garrett said finally, his voice soft and chiding. You can't think like that. I know, I'm a terrible person, she whispered back. But the thought crossed my mind. Just for a second. Imagine if we didn't have to hurt her. Imagine if we could just be together without having to completely destroy her life first. They had actually considered my death. Not wished for it, not plotted it, but considered it. They had looked at the very real possibility of me dying on an operating table and seen it not as a tragedy, but as a convenient, tidy solution to their messy little problem. That was it. That was the moment everything inside me shifted. The pain, the grief, the heartbreak, it all crystallized into something cold, hard, and sharp. That night, lying in bed next to my husband, feeling the familiar warmth of his body while he slept peacefully, completely oblivious, I made my decision. A simple, quiet divorce wasn't enough. Public humiliation wasn't enough. They needed to face consequences that matched the chilling cruelty of their betrayal. They didn't just break my heart. They had stood on the edge of my potential grave and contemplated how much easier their lives would be. And for that, I would not just divorce them. I would dismantle them. Piece by calculated piece. My plan began to form that night, a cold, clear blueprint in the darkness of my bedroom. It started with the thing we had built together, the symbol of our partnership, the business. Robert's Marketing Solutions had several major clients, but our crown jewel, the one we had poured 2 years of our lives into courting, was Morrison Hotels. They were a luxury hotel chain looking for a complete brand overhaul. The contract was worth an estimated $800,000 annually, and we were scheduled to present our final, comprehensive campaign proposal in 2 weeks. I had been the primary creative force behind the campaign. I was the one who'd stayed up until 3 a.m. night after night, perfecting the strategy, the messaging, the entire creative vision. Garrett's role was client relations, schmoozing, dinners, golf games. He was the face, I was the brain. What he didn't know was that I had been secretly developing a much deeper, more personal relationship with Rebecca Morrison, the CEO's fiercely intelligent daughter and the new director of marketing. We had met at a women's leadership conference in Chicago 6 months prior. We had bonded instantly over our shared experiences of navigating male-dominated industries. She had confided in me over cocktails about her constant struggles with her father's old-fashioned, patriarchal attitudes and her burning desire to modernize the company's image. We had a real rapport, a mutual respect that went beyond a simple client-vendor relationship. He just saw her as a lucrative contract, I saw her as a powerful ally. The next afternoon was my chance. I saw on their shared calendar, a tool I now monitored with religious fervor, that Garrett and Corinne were planning a long hike at a nearby state park. I knew it was a lie. The spyware had captured Corinne's search history, romantic restaurants with private booths. While they were out playing house, I locked myself in the home office, took a deep, steadying breath, and called Rebecca's private cell number. Audrey. I'm so glad you called. How are you feeling? She answered, her voice warm and genuinely concerned. Garrett mentioned you had surgery. I hope you're recovering well and taking it easy. Much better, thank you, Rebecca. I'm actually calling because I need to discuss something highly confidential with you, something that directly affects our working relationship and the Morrison Hotels campaign. Her tone shifted instantly, becoming sharp and professional. Of course. I'm all ears. What's going on? I took a calculated risk. I laid out a carefully edited, professional version of the truth. I told her that due to irreparable personal differences, Garrett and I were in the process of a divorce and would be dissolving our business partnership. I told her that his current, personal situation was, in my professional opinion, compromising his judgment and the integrity of our company. I am the sole architect of the Morrison campaign, I said, my voice firm and unwavering. The creative direction, the strategy, the execution plan, it is all my work. I am prepared to present it to you next week, as planned. But I will understand completely if these unfortunate circumstances make you and your board uncomfortable continuing with our company in any capacity. Rebecca was quiet for a long, agonizing moment. I could hear the faint sound of her tapping a pen on her desk. Audrey, she said finally, and I held my breath. To be perfectly honest with you, this explains some things. Garrett seemed unfocused and distracted during our last few meetings. There were some glaring inconsistencies in the preliminary materials he presented, errors that I had to point out and have his team correct. I felt a surge of triumphant validation. I've always felt that you were the true driving force behind this campaign. Send me the complete proposal directly, by end of day tomorrow. If it's as good as I think it is, we will move forward with you, and you exclusively. What about Garrett? I asked, allowing a slight tremor into my voice. Let me worry about that conversation, she said, and I could hear the new steeliness in her tone. He'll be hearing from our corporate legal department regarding the termination of our preliminary agreement. 1 down. 4 to go. The next day, I repeated the process. I set up a series of urgent virtual meetings with our other major clients. I didn't have the same deep personal connection with them as I did with Rebecca, but I had something just as powerful, the results. I had the data, the strategies, and the history of success from years of my dedicated work. By the end of the week, I had secured written agreements with 4 of our 5 biggest accounts to transition their lucrative contracts to a new entity, under my sole proprietorship, the moment the divorce was officially filed. The 5th client, unfortunately, was a personal friend of Garrett's from his college fraternity. I knew he would likely stay loyal to him, out of some misplaced sense of brotherhood. But losing 80% of the company's annual revenue would leave Garrett with nothing more than a fancy logo, a half-empty office, and a mountain of overhead he could no longer afford. He was the captain of a sinking ship, and he didn't even know it was taking on water. Phase 2 of my plan was designed to target their personal reputations, to strip away the carefully constructed facade they presented to the world. And they handed me the perfect opportunity on a silver platter. Through the spyware, I saw that they were planning to attend a high-profile charity gala together the following weekend. It was for the Children's Hospital, a cause I deeply cared about. Garrett was supposed to be there for business networking. Corinne, in a move of breathtaking audacity, was attending as my official substitute, since I was still too weak and fragile from my recovery. The gala was one of the biggest, most photographed social events of the year in our city, attended by every business leader, local politician, and society figure who mattered. It was the perfect stage for their public debut, and for their public humiliation. I looked up the number for the event organizer, a woman named Helen Karp. I had served with Helen on various charity committees over the years. She was a notorious, silver-haired gossip, but she was also fiercely loyal if you were in her inner circle. Helen, darling, I said into the phone, injecting a note of weary, breathless fragility into my voice. It's Audrey Roberts. I'm so sorry to bother you. Audrey. Not a bother at all, dear. I was so sorry to hear about your surgery. We're all thinking of you. You're not canceling your table, are you? Oh, no, of course not, I said. But I have a rather delicate and deeply embarrassing situation that I felt I had to discuss with you. I proceeded to explain the affair, framing it with my deep concern and humiliation that they would be using her prestigious, heartfelt event as cover for their sordid relationship, with Corinne attending under the false pretense of being my loving, supportive substitute. "That is absolutely, positively disgusting," Helen hissed into the phone, her voice dripping with outrage. "Using my gala, for sick children, no less, to cover their affair? The unmitigated nerve!" "I don't want to cause a scene, of course, Helen," I said carefully, planting the seed. "I would never want to detract from the evening's purpose. But I thought you, of all people, as the chairwoman, should know the real situation." "Leave it to me, dear," she said, her voice filled with a venomous delight that I knew I could count on. "I will handle this. Discreetly." What Helen Karp considered discreet turned out to be far more gloriously public than I could have ever hoped. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist. During her main welcome speech at the start of the evening, she stood at the podium, bathed in a warm, flattering spotlight. "And tonight," she announced, her voice booming through the silent, wrapped ballroom, "I'd like to take a moment to recognize some of the very special couples in attendance who do so much for our community year after year, including the handsome Garrett Roberts and his lovely partner for the evening, Corinne, who are here together while Garrett's dear, brave wife Audrey recovers from surgery at home. Let's give them a big hand for their support." I watched it all unfold on the charity's high-definition livestream, sitting comfortably on my living room sofa, a warm cup of chamomile tea in my hands and a growing sense of profound, righteous satisfaction spreading through my chest. The broadcast camera, as if on cue, panned directly to their table. I saw their frozen, panicked smiles. I saw the sudden, ghastly pallor on their faces as they realized what had just happened. The room didn't applaud. It went dead silent for a beat. And then, the whispers started, a ripple of scandal spreading from table to table. It was perfect. But the real masterstroke, the move I considered my nuclear option, I had been saving for last. My sister's career. Corinne worked as a senior designer for a very prestigious, very conservative architectural firm in Portland. It was the kind of company that plastered its website with glossy photos of its employees building houses for the underprivileged and wrote long blog posts about its unwavering commitment to family values and ethical business practices. I'd done my research. I'd read their employee handbook online. They had a strict, ironclad morality clause in their employment contracts regarding any personal conduct that could compromise professional judgment or reflect poorly on the firm's carefully curated public image. I also knew that Corinne's direct supervisor, a senior partner named Catherine Walsh, was a straight-laced, no-nonsense career woman who had built her reputation on integrity and had zero patience for personal drama that bled into the workplace. I drafted a carefully, almost surgically, worded email to Ms. Walsh. I attached a small, impeccably curated selection of the evidence I had gathered, a few of the less explicit but clearly romantic text messages, a screenshot of a hotel booking Garrett had made for them in her name on a weekday afternoon, and, the piece de resistance, the detailed spyware logs showing the dozens of personal calls and hundreds of messages sent between her and Garrett during her documented, billable work hours. I framed the entire email as a painful but necessary courtesy from a concerned third party. "I thought you should be aware of this deeply unfortunate situation," I wrote, "as I am concerned that Ms. Smith's personal judgment is compromised, which may be affecting her work performance. Furthermore, I worry that her ongoing affair with my husband, a prominent business figure in our shared community, could potentially reflect poorly on your company's esteemed reputation and its commitment to family values." Catherine Walsh's response was swift and decisive. It didn't even come to me. It came in the form of a hysterical, sobbing phone call from Corinne to Garrett that my little recording device picked up with perfect, crystal clarity the next afternoon. She'd been called into a meeting with HR and Catherine Walsh. She had been fired. Effective immediately. For gross misconduct and violation of her employment contract. The final phase of my plan required patience and perfect timing. I knew from their increasingly frantic and paranoid recorded conversations that they had decided to finally confess everything to me the following weekend. They thought they were taking control of the narrative. They'd even planned and rehearsed a whole script about how they'd fallen in love despite trying to fight it, how deeply sorry they were for the timing, how they hoped we could all handle this with maturity and grace. I had other plans. On Friday afternoon, after receiving the final, damning report from John, I called Benjamin Walsh. "Benjamin," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a frozen lake. "I'm ready to move forward. With everything. File the divorce papers first thing Monday morning." "Are you sure, Audrey?" he asked, a note of caution in his voice. "Once we file, there's no going back. The war begins." "I'm sure," I said. "And I'm ready." Saturday morning, while Garrett was at the gym, blissfully unaware, and Corinne was out getting coffee, equally oblivious, I arranged our living room like a theatrical stage. I positioned my laptop on the coffee table, ready to display my meticulously organized evidence folder. I double-checked that the audio recorder was functioning perfectly. And then, one by one, I invited my cast of supporting characters. When Garrett and Corinne walked through the front door a little after 10, laughing about something they'd heard on the radio, their laughter died in their throats. They found me sitting calmly on the sofa, waiting for them. And I was not alone. My parents, their faces grim and stony, were sitting in the two wingback armchairs. Garrett's older brother, John, was leaning against the mantelpiece, his arms crossed over his broad chest, looking like a thundercloud. And our two closest mutual friends, Lisa and Tom, were perched uncomfortably on the love seat, their eyes darting nervously between me and the door. What's going on?" Garrett asked, his smile faltering as he took in the funereal, intervention-like atmosphere. "Mom? Dad? What are you guys doing here?" "Please, sit down," I said, my voice as sweet as sugar, and just as poisonous. "Both of you. I told everyone you had something important you wanted to share with us all. I thought it would be nice to have family and friends here for your big announcement." They exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated panic, but they were trapped. They slowly, hesitantly, took seats on the opposite couch, perching on the very edge of the cushions as if they might need to make a quick escape. "Audrey, what announcement?" Corinne asked, her voice a nervous, reedy tremor. "I don't understand." "The announcement you've been planning and rehearsing all week, of course," I said, my eyes locking onto hers, refusing to let her look away. "About your relationship. About your love." The color drained from both their faces simultaneously. They looked like a pair of wax statues. I don't know what you mean," Garrett stammered, looking around the room for an ally and finding nothing but cold, disappointed stares. I didn't say another word. I simply reached forward, opened my laptop, and turned it so everyone in the room could see the screen. It displayed a single, neatly organized folder. The folder was labeled Evidence. It was full of subfolders, photos, screenshots, audio files, financials. "I've been recovering from surgery for the past 2 weeks," I said, my voice calm and steady, projecting through the suffocating silence of the room. "It's given me a lot of time. A lot of time to think, and to observe, and to document." I clicked on the first photo. The grainy, pixelated image from the hospital window, of them kissing in the cafeteria, filled the screen. My mother let out a sharp, wounded gasp and brought her hand to her mouth. Lisa started to cry silently, tears streaming down her face. John just stared at his brother, his expression a mixture of pure, unadulterated disgust and profound disappointment. "This picture was taken 3 days after my major surgery," I continued, my voice as cold and detached as a news anchor's. "While I was upstairs, in pain, trusting that my husband and my sister were taking care of me." "Audrey, please," Corinne started to plead, her eyes filling with big, crocodile tears. "Let us explain. It's not what it looks like." "Oh, I think you've explained plenty over the past year," I said, cutting her off with a sharp gesture. I clicked to the next file, a screenshot of one of their more nauseatingly romantic text exchanges. "This is from your so-called disappearing message app. A little tip for you both, those apps aren't actually secure. You can screenshot anything, if you're fast enough. And I've had nothing but time. I had hours of it. Evidence upon evidence. I walked them through it all, methodically. The photos. The messages. The recorded conversations about my business, my inheritance, their future together. I showed them the financial records, highlighted in yellow, showing the hotel stays, the expensive dinners, the jewelry for her, all paid for with our business credit card. 1 year, 3 months, and 12 days, I said, reading from a small piece of paper in my hand where I had done the math. That's how long this has been going on. 1 year, 3 months, and 12 days of lies, of deception, of the deepest betrayal imaginable. While we were supposed to be building our business together, Garrett. While you were supposed to be helping me plan our 5th wedding anniversary party, Corinne. We never meant for this to happen, Audrey, Garrett said desperately, his voice cracking. We tried to fight it, but we fell in love. But you decided your happiness was more important than my well-being, I finished for him, my voice dripping with contempt. You decided that lying to my face every single day for over a year was preferable to a single, difficult, honest conversation. You decided that using my medical emergency, my potential funeral, as cover for your affair was an acceptable course of action. And then, for the grand finale, I double-clicked on the audio file I had labeled the kitchen. A part of me wondered if it would be easier. Corinne's whispered, treacherous words filled the silent room. The room erupted. My father, a quiet, gentle man his entire life, lunged to his feet and started shouting at Corinne, his face a mask of purple rage. Lisa was openly sobbing into Tom's shoulder. John looked like he was physically restraining himself from launching across the room and punching his brother in the face. But I wasn't finished. I raised my voice just enough to cut through the chaos, to command their attention one last time. Here's what's going to happen now, I announced, my voice ringing with an authority no one in that room had ever heard from me before. Garrett, you will find divorce papers waiting for you at what's left of your office on Monday morning. I'm keeping the house. My lawyer, Benjamin Walsh, has extensive and irrefutable documentation of your adultery and your fraudulent misuse of company funds, which gives me significant leverage for more than the standard 50% of the business assets. And speaking of the business. You can't do that, he protested weakly, his face ashen. I can, and I already have. You will also find that most of our major clients have already signed legally binding contracts to work exclusively with me and my new firm going forward. You have a brand, Garrett, but you no longer have a business. I turned my gaze to my sister, who was sobbing now, great, heaving, ugly sobs. Audrey, please. I'm your sister. I love you. You are my sister, I corrected her, my voice as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. Now, you're unemployed. I took the liberty of contacting your supervisor. Catherine Walsh sends her regards, by the way. Her head snapped up, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. What did you do? I sent your supervisor a neat little package of irrefutable evidence of your affair, including detailed proof that you were using company time and resources to coordinate your personal meetings with a married man. She felt, and I quote, that your behavior did not align with the company's core values. I stood up then, my body feeling surprisingly strong. I steadied myself on the back of the couch, the pull on my incision a dull, distant throb. You both made choices, I said, looking from his terrified face to her completely destroyed one. You chose deception over honesty. You chose selfishness over loyalty. You chose to betray the one person in the world who loved and trusted you both completely. Now, you get to live with the consequences of those choices. This is insane, Garrett said, finally finding his voice and getting to his feet. You're a monster, Audrey. You're destroying our lives over this. If you are still listening, please help me like the video and comment the number 1 below, so I know you've given me a like, and I understand you're with me on this journey. Your support is a tremendous encouragement for me. Please comment the number 1 and listen as I continue my story. I'm not destroying anything, I replied, my voice dangerously calm, the eye of the hurricane. I'm simply holding up a mirror to what you both have already done. Your affair destroyed your marriage, Garrett. Your lies destroyed our business partnership. Your betrayal destroyed our family, Corinne. I'm just making sure that everyone, including the legal and financial systems, knows the unvarnished truth. The gathering, my little curated intervention, devolved into chaos after that. My parents, heartbroken and furious, were trying to comfort me while simultaneously screaming at Corinne. Lisa and Tom, bless their hearts, were trying to calm my father down. Garrett, finally realizing he had no allies left in the room, that his charm had finally failed him, just grabbed his keys and his wallet from the entryway table and stormed out of the house, out of my life, without another word. Corinne tried to approach me one last time, her hands outstretched, babbling incoherent apologies through her tears, but I just turned my back on her. I wasn't interested in her performance anymore. My parents, too ashamed and angry to even look at her, ended up driving her to a nearby hotel for the night. They told her to be gone by the time they got back. Garrett's brother, John, was the last to leave. The house was suddenly, blessedly quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Audrey, I am so sorry, he said, his face etched with a deep, profound shame for his brother's actions. I had no idea. If I had known anything, I swear. It's not your fault, John, I assured him, my voice softening for the first time that day. But I do appreciate you being here. Your support means more than you know. Is there anything I can do? Anything at all? A character witness for the divorce? Any way I can help? I looked at him, at his honest, worried face, and an idea, the final, perfect, devastating piece of my plan, clicked neatly into place. John was a private investigator. It's how I had known which spyware and which recording equipment were the most reliable and undetectable in the first place. He'd given me the advice as a hypothetical, for a friend's problem. Actually, I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face for the first time in weeks. There's one more thing you can help me with. The final nail in their shared coffin came 2 weeks later, delivered to my lawyer's office in a neat, unassuming manila envelope from John. He had done some digging into their finances and digital footprints, a much deeper dive than I ever could have managed. He discovered that their plans for a future together were far more advanced, and far more criminal, than I knew. Garrett had secretly opened several new bank accounts in Portland under his name alone. Corinne had been actively apartment hunting online, looking at 2-bedroom places they could afford on his anticipated solo salary. But the most damning discovery of all, the one that took this from a messy divorce to a felony, was this: they had already filed an application for a new business license in the state of Oregon. The name of the company was to be West Coast Marketing, and its business plan, which John's contact had managed to obtain a copy of, was a word-for-word, verbatim copy of a proprietary 5-year growth strategy that I had single-handedly developed for our company. They were planning to steal my clients, my methodologies, my trade secrets, and my intellectual property. That wasn't just adultery. That was industrial espionage and felony theft. And it carried both heavy civil and criminal penalties. My lawyer, Benjamin, was practically giddy. We filed the additional charges immediately. The court case became a minor media sensation in our small city's business community. The local business journal, in its quarterly issue, ran a feature story with the headline, Betrayal, Bankruptcy, and Business, How Local Marketing CEO Audrey Roberts Exposed Her Husband's Elaborate Deception. The story had everything: a sordid family betrayal, corporate espionage, stolen business secrets, and a dramatic, now legendary public confrontation. Garrett lost his one remaining client the day the theft charges became public. No one wanted to be in business with a man who would steal from his own wife and his own company. Facing overwhelming legal fees and with no income, he was forced to declare personal bankruptcy within 6 months. Corinne, with a termination for cause and a pending criminal lawsuit on her record, was completely unemployable in her field. The architectural and design industry is surprisingly small, and reputation is everything. She eventually had to move back in with our parents, who, to this day, treat her with a strained, disappointed civility. And their grand love affair? The one they were willing to destroy my life for? It didn't survive the harsh glare of reality. Without the thrill of secrecy, without the financial cushion that I had unknowingly provided for their dates and getaways, they discovered they didn't actually have much in common besides their mutual deceit. The crushing stress of the legal proceedings, the constant money troubles, and the complete social isolation took its toll. They broke up acrimoniously 8 months after their affair was exposed, each bitterly blaming the other for their spectacular, self-inflicted downfall. I, on the other hand, rebuilt my life. Piece by meticulous piece. Robert's Marketing Solutions was reborn as Simply Rivers Marketing, and it thrived under my sole, focused ownership. The Morrison Hotel's contract was a massive success, and that victory led to 3 more luxury hospitality clients within a year. My reputation for fierce integrity and brilliant strategy, ironically, actually improved my business prospects. I sold the house on the tree-lined street. There were too many ghosts in those rooms, too many bad memories soaked into the walls. I bought a sleek, modern condo downtown, a place that was all mine, with a stunning view of the city skyline and a small, sunny studio where I could work from home whenever I wanted. The garden was smaller, just a few terracotta pots on a wide balcony overflowing with herbs and flowers, but it was all mine. The physical recovery from the surgery was complete within a couple of months. The emotional recovery, well, that took longer. But I was surprised to discover, in the quiet aftermath, that my methodical quest for justice had been remarkably therapeutic. There is something deeply, primally satisfying about seeing things set right. About watching people face the direct, unvarnished, and entirely predictable consequences of their own selfish actions. I started dating again after about a year. Nothing serious at first. Just dinner here, a movie there, with kind, uncomplicated men who had no connection to my previous life. It felt strange and terrifying to trust again, but not impossible. The last I heard, Garrett was working as a sales associate at a big-box electronics store 2 states away, his business degree gathering dust. Corinne was taking online courses to become a veterinary technician, a quiet, solitary career where her past was less likely to follow her. Neither of them had found lasting happiness in the wreckage they had created. Sometimes, a well-meaning friend will ask if I regret how I handled everything. If I think, perhaps, in the quiet light of retrospect, I went too far. If I should have just filed for divorce quietly, taken my half, and moved on with my life with grace and dignity. The answer is always, unequivocally, no. They made their choices deliberately, consciously, over the course of more than a year, with full and complete knowledge of how their actions would destroy me. They planned their future together while lying to my face every single day. They looked at my medical crisis, my potential death, not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. The punishment fit the crime. But more than that, their public and catastrophic downfall served as a warning. Word got around our community. Word got around about what happened when you betrayed Audrey Roberts. I never had to worry about business partners or romantic interests being dishonest with me again. They'd all heard the story. And they knew I was not a victim. I learned something vital during those dark, difficult weeks of planning and execution. I learned that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. I was capable of cold, strategic thinking under unimaginable pressure, of compartmentalizing my overwhelming emotion to focus on practical, decisive action. I was capable of fighting back, fiercely and effectively, when someone tried to destroy my life. The woman who went into surgery that day had been trusting, loving, and perhaps a little bit naive. The woman who emerged was sharper, more careful, and utterly, completely unwilling to ever be anyone's victim again. They thought they were dealing with someone who would quietly accept their betrayal, who would be too heartbroken, too weak, or too mature to fight back. They were wrong. And that single, arrogant mistake cost them everything they thought they were gaining by betraying me. If you've been through something similar, or if this story resonated with you in any way, I hope you know that you are not alone, and that you are stronger than you think. Share your own thoughts or stories in the comments below. I read them all. Thank you for listening.